Egypt's foreign minister makes an unprecedented statement. All options are on the table. That's diplomatic language for, we're considering military strikes. Over water. Not oil. Not territory. Not ideology. Water. Here's what most people don't realize. Right now, more people are living under water stress than at any point in human history. By 2025, that's 2 years from now, 2/3 of the world's population could face water shortages. And unlike oil, which we're learning to replace with alternatives, water has no substitute. You can drive an electric car. You can't drink electricity. The 20th century was defined by wars over oil and ideology. The 21st century will be defined by wars over the honor resource that literally keeps us alive. Welcome to the water wars, where rivers become weapons, dams become acts of wear, and your morning shower is connected to geopolitical conflicts happening thousands of miles away. This isn't a future scenario. It's happening right now, and it's about to get much worse. The invisible crisis, 045330. Let's start with a number that should terrify you. 97.5% of Earth's water is salt water. Of the remaining 2.5%, that's fresh water. Nearly 70% is locked in ice caps and glaciers. That leaves less than 1% of Earth's total water available for human use. And that 1% has to support 8 billion people, plus agriculture that feeds those people, plus industries that employ those people. Now here's the kicker, that 1% isn't evenly distributed. Not even close. Brazil has 12% of the world's fresh water. Russia has another 10%. Canada, Indonesia, China, Colombia, these 6 countries control almost half of the world's renewable fresh water. Meanwhile, the Middle East and North Africa, home to 6% of the world's population, have access to less than 1% of the world's fresh water. This isn't just inequality. This is a civilizational crisis waiting to explode. But the real problem isn't total water availability. It's where water is located versus where people live and how those locations are changing. Climate change is fundamentally rewiring the global water cycle. Regions that have had reliable rainfall for millennia are experiencing unprecedented droughts. Areas that rarely saw floods are now underwater regularly. The Himalayan glaciers, which supply water to 2 billion people across India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, and Southeast Asia, are melting 65% faster than they were 2 decades ago. When those glaciers disappear, and they will disappear within our lifetimes, 2 billion people will face catastrophic water shortages. But even before that happens, the changing water availability is creating tensions that are already boiling over into violence. Syria's civil war, which most people think was about political freedom or religious conflict, was actually triggered by the worst drought in 900 years. Between 2006 and 2010, 85% of Syria's livestock died, and crop failures forced 1.5 million people to migrate from rural areas to cities. This migration overwhelmed urban infrastructure, created unemployment, fueled resentment, and set the stage for the uprising that became a civil war that's killed over 500,000 people. Water didn't cause the Syrian civil war alone, but it created the conditions that made it inevitable. And Syria is just the beginning. Rivers as battlefields, 339K. Let's talk about something most people don't think about. Rivers don't respect borders. There are 286 international river basins, rivers that flow through multiple countries. More than 3 billion people depend on water from these shared rivers. And nearly every single one of these rivers is now a potential conflict zone. The Nile River Basin is the most dangerous. The Nile flows through 11 countries before reaching Egypt. But 85% of the Nile's water comes from Ethiopia's Blue Nile and Atbara rivers. For thousands of years, this wasn't a problem because Ethiopia lacked the technical capability to control the water. Egypt just took what it needed downstream. But in 2011, Ethiopia started building the Grand Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa. When fully operational, it will be able to hold more water than the entire annual flow of the Blue Nile. Egypt's position is simple. The Nile is existential. 95% of Egypt's population lives along the Nile or in its delta. Egypt has no other significant water sources. If Ethiopia fills the dam too quickly or uses too much water for irrigation, Egypt faces catastrophic shortages. Ethiopia's position is equally simple. We have a right to develop our resources. 65% of Ethiopia's population has no electricity. The dam will generate enough power to transform the country's economy and provide electricity to millions. Both positions are completely rational. Both are completely incompatible. Negotiations have been ongoing for over a decade with no resolution. Egypt has explicitly threatened military action. Ethiopia has said any attack on the dam would be considered an act of war. Meanwhile, Sudan is caught in the middle, needing cooperation from both neighbors, but unable to satisfy either. This isn't just a regional problem. Egypt is a key U.S. ally. Ethiopia is increasingly aligned with China. A conflict over the Nile could draw in major powers. But the Nile isn't unique. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow through Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Turkey's Southeast Anatolia project, a massive dam system, has reduced water flow to downstream countries by up to 80% during dry periods. Iraq, already devastated by decades of war, is facing water shortages so severe that agricultural production has collapsed and ancient marshlands, some of humanity's oldest inhabited regions, are turning into desert. Turkey's position: these are our rivers originating in our territory. We have a right to use them. Iraq's position: we've depended on these rivers for 7,000 years of civilization. Cutting off our water is an existential threat. Again, both positions are rational. Both are incompatible. The Indus River flows from China through India to Pakistan. The Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 was supposed to resolve sharing disputes, but climate change and growing populations are making the agreement obsolete. Pakistan accuses India of building dams and diversion projects that violate the treaty. India says it's exercising its legitimate rights while Pakistan fails to use its allocated water efficiently. These aren't just diplomatic disputes. India and Pakistan are nuclear powers with a history of military conflict. Water disputes between them could literally trigger nuclear war. The Mekong River flows through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. China has built or is building 11 major dams on the upper Mekong, giving Beijing enormous control over water flow to downstream countries. During the 2019 drought, China faced accusations of holding back water while downstream countries experienced their worst dry season in decades. China denied the accusations, but the message was clear. Whoever controls the river's source controls everyone downstream. This pattern is repeating across every continent. The Jordan River, the Danube, the Rio Grande, the Zambezi. Every major river system is becoming a zone of competition and potential conflict. The technology race, 2030. But here's where it gets interesting. Technology is creating entirely new dynamics in water geopolitics. Desalination, turning seawater into freshwater, has existed for decades but was always too expensive for large-scale use. That's changing rapidly. Israel now gets 80% of its domestic water from desalination. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are massively expanding their desalination capacity. Even California is building new desalination plants. This technology is fundamentally changing the geopolitical equation. Countries with coastlines and energy resources can now become water independent, regardless of their natural freshwater resources. But desalination requires enormous amounts of energy. The countries succeeding at desalination are energy-rich Gulf states and technologically advanced nations like Israel. This is creating a new divide: water-secure coastal countries with energy and technology versus water-stressed inland countries without either. And it's not just about national security. It's about power projection. Israel is now exporting water to Jordan, historically a relationship where Jordan had water leverage. The power dynamic has completely reversed. Saudi Arabia is investing in desalination technology throughout Africa and the Middle East, creating water dependencies that translate into political influence. But desalination has massive environmental costs. The brine byproduct, super salty water, is typically dumped back into the ocean, creating dead zones that devastate marine ecosystems. The energy requirements contribute to climate change, which worsens water scarcity, which increases demand for desalination. It's a vicious cycle. Meanwhile, other technologies are emerging that could reshape water geopolitics even more dramatically. Atmospheric water generators, machines that pull water directly from air humidity, are becoming commercially viable. Companies are deploying these systems in water-stressed regions, creating water sources that are completely independent of rainfall or rivers. This technology could eventually free communities from dependence on centralized water infrastructure, but it's currently only accessible to wealthy populations. Precision agriculture using sensors, drones, and AI is reducing water consumption in farming by up to 40%. Since agriculture consumes 70% of global fresh water, this technology could dramatically reduce overall water stress. But again, only wealthy, technologically advanced regions can afford these systems. Poor regions continue using inefficient traditional methods. The result is that water technology is accelerating in quality rather than reducing it. Water recycling and treatment technologies are advancing rapidly. Singapore now recycles up to 40% of its water. Technologies that were science fiction a decade ago, like turning sewage into drinking water, are now routine in some places. But these technologies require stable governments, significant investment, and public acceptance. They're not options for conflict zones or failed states. The groundwater crisis 1330 to 1700. Now let's talk about the crisis most people don't even know exists. Groundwater depletion. Underground aquifers, natural water storage in porous rock, provide water for 2 billion people worldwide. But we're pumping groundwater faster than nature can replenish it. The Ogallala Aquifer under the American Great Plains, one of the world's largest, is being depleted 8 times faster than it can refill naturally. Parts of it will be unusable within our lifetimes. When the Ogallala runs dry, America's agricultural heartland will face catastrophic production declines. India is in even worse shape. Groundwater provides 60% of the country's irrigation water. But Indian farmers are pumping so much groundwater that water tables are falling by several meters per year. The North China Plain, which produces half of China's wheat and a third of its corn, is depleting its groundwater at unsustainable rates. Chinese government studies predict major aquifer systems could be dry within 30 years. But the most dangerous groundwater situation is invisible transboundary aquifers. There are at least 592 aquifer systems that cross international borders. Unlike rivers, which are visible and subject to international laws and treaties, aquifers are underground and largely unregulated. Countries are pumping shared aquifers with almost no international oversight or coordination. This creates a tragedy of the commons where every country has incentive to pump as much as possible before their neighbors do. The Guarani Aquifer under South America is one of the world's largest freshwater reserves. It lies under Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. All 4 countries are increasing pumping rates, but there's minimal coordination about sustainable extraction. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer under North Africa contains fossil water stored over thousands of years that isn't being replenished. Egypt, Libya, Chad, and Sudan are all pumping this aquifer, essentially mining a non-renewable resource. When it runs out, and it will run out, these countries will face instant water crises with no fallback options. But here's what makes groundwater geopolitically dangerous. It's invisible. You can monitor a dam on a river with satellites. You can see when upstream countries are diverting water. Groundwater pumping is hidden. Countries can quietly drain shared aquifers while denying they're doing anything. This creates situations where countries don't realize they're in conflict until the crisis is already severe. The migration tsunami, 1700-2030. Now let's connect this to something that's already reshaping global politics: migration. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, water scarcity could displace up to 700 million people. That's nearly 9% of the current global population. To put that in perspective, the Syrian refugee crisis, which destabilized European politics and empowered nationalist movements across the continent, involved about 6 million refugees. We're potentially looking at a migration wave 100 times larger. And unlike economic migration, which can be managed through policy changes, water migration is driven by physical survival. People will move whether governments allow it or not. The regions most vulnerable to water-driven migration, aerial-ready, politically unstable: Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of South Asia. These regions are home to some of the world's fastest-growing populations, weakest governments, and most severe water stress. When water scarcity forces massive population movements, it won't just be a humanitarian crisis. It will be a security crisis that makes current border conflicts look trivial. Europe is already struggling with migration from North Africa and the Middle East. Current migration numbers are nothing compared to what's coming if water scarcity triggers widespread collapse in these regions. The US-Mexico border is already a political flashpoint. But Mexico is facing severe water stress, with major cities experiencing water shortages and agricultural regions depleting groundwater. Climate change is making this worse. If Mexican agriculture collapses due to water scarcity, their salting migration could dwarf current numbers. China's water situation could create the world's largest internal migration. Already, millions have moved from water-stressed northern regions to the south. As northern China's water crisis worsens, this internal migration could destabilize the entire country. But migration isn't just about people moving from water-poor to water-rich regions. It's about massive populations concentrating in the few places where water remains available, overwhelming infrastructure, and creating new conflicts. The Lake Chad Basin, shared by Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria, has shrunk by 90% since the 1960s. This region is home to nearly 50 million people who depend on the lake for water and food. As the lake disappears, populations are concentrating in smaller areas with remaining water, intensifying competition and fueling violent conflicts. The rise of Boko Haram and other militant groups in this region is directly connected to water stress and resource competition. This pattern is repeating globally. Water scarcity doesn't just cause migration, it concentrates populations in ways that create perfect conditions for conflict, extremism, and state collapse. The corporate water grab, 2030-2030. Here's an aspect of water wars that gets less attention but might be most important: corporate control of water resources. Water is increasingly being treated as a commodity that can be owned, bought, and sold. Investment firms are buying water rights and aquifer access across the world. Michael Burry, the investor who predicted the 2008 financial crisis, said water is the best investment and has been accumulating water rights for years. Why? Because unlike oil, which has substitutes, water is irreplaceable. As scarcity increases, whoever controls water resources will have tremendous power. Multinational corporations are buying farmland specifically for its water rights. In water-stressed regions, land value is increasingly determined by water access rather than soil quality. This is creating situations where foreign corporations control local water resources while local populations face shortages. In South America, mining companies are depleting local water sources while communities struggle to meet basic needs. In Africa, agricultural corporations are exporting water-intensive crops while nearby populations lack drinking water. The legal frameworks governing water rights were mostly created when water was abundant and no one imagined scarcity. These laws are often inadequate to prevent resource capture by powerful interests. Some countries are pushing back. Bolivia famously expelled Bechtel Corporation after the company tried to privatize water systems and dramatically raise prices. But many countries lack the political power or financial resources to resist corporate water capture. The bottled water industry is another example. Companies like Nestlé, Coca-Cola, and Danone extract groundwater, often paying minimal fees, and sell it back to populations at enormous markups. This isn't just exploitation, it's geopolitical power. Control over bottled water infrastructure means control over water access during crises. During the Flint water crisis in Michigan, bottled water became the primary source of safe water. Corporations profited from a public health emergency created by government failure. This dynamic could become the norm in water-stressed regions. Public water systems fail, private companies step in. Water becomes a luxury good rather than a human right. What comes next? 23 and 25, and so what does this mean for the future? The optimistic scenario is that water scarcity forces unprecedented international cooperation. Countries realize that shared water resources require shared management and create new frameworks for equitable distribution. Technology advances make water production and conservation cheap enough that scarcity becomes manageable. Investment in infrastructure, desalination, and efficiency reduces competition for limited resources. This scenario is possible. Water scarcity is predictable, unlike many geopolitical challenges. We know where the problems are and have technologies to address them. But implementation requires political will, international cooperation, and massive investment. None of these are guaranteed. The pessimistic scenario is that water scarcity accelerates existing conflicts and creates new ones. Upstream countries build dams and diversion projects regardless of downstream impacts. Water-stressed countries become failed states, creating power vacuums filled by extremist groups. Mass migrations destabilize receiving countries and fuel nationalist backlash. Water access becomes increasingly privatized and unequal, with wealthy populations enjoying abundance, while poor populations fight over scraps. The realistic scenario is probably somewhere between these extremes. Some regions will cooperate effectively. Others will descend into conflict. Technology will help but won't solve everything. What's certain is that water will define 21st century geopolitics as much as oil defined the 20th century. The difference is that we can live without oil. We can't live without water. Every person watching this video is connected to these conflicts. Your food is grown using water that someone else needs. Your products are manufactured using water from stressed sources. Your lifestyle contributes to climate change that's disrupting water cycles. The water wars aren't happening somewhere else to someone else. They're happening now, everywhere, and we're all participants whether we realize it or not. The question isn't whether water wars will happen. It's whether we'll address water scarcity before conflicts become unmanageable. Because water doesn't negotiate. It doesn't compromise. It doesn't care about politics or borders or ideologies. Water just exists or it doesn't. And increasingly, in the places where people need it most, it doesn't. The next time you turn on a tap and water flows out, remember, billions of people can't do that. And the number is growing. The water wars have already begun. We just haven't admitted it yet.